As I'm getting started here to do this late season maintenance, post-winterized, I'm going to call it my annual maintenance. Just a reminder that this is what I do. Some things are not perfect. I bought a copy of the Mercruiser Service Manual, and I work to that manual as best I can. I do modify some of the durations because of my usage profile. Now, this boat here is, 25 years old, and it has a little over 300 hours on it. I don't know, 330 or something like that. So, I'm in the 10 to 20 hours a year range. The boat's stored either on the trailer or on a hoist. I don't leave it in the water through the summer. So I make some judgments about how long I'm going to go with some of the maintenance items, recognizing that I may be taking some risk at that. The boat's long out of warranty, so I'm not worried about invalidating the warranty. If I guess wrong and I damage a part, I'm going to have to fix it. The main thing is to watch out for the ones that are safety related, because you don't want your boat to catch fire, to sink, to do whatever. And again, best recommendation is buy yourself a copy of this service manual. And the Mercury manuals are, I don't know, on the order of $100 or so. But when you consider what it costs to get something serviced, that's not a bad price. And there's one book for the engine. There's one book for the stern drive. And you can even buy the parts manuals. Now those go out of date as they supersede things, but you can buy the parts manuals that have exploded views and tell you what the parts are that you could get. So, just a caution, I recommend you follow the book. Anything else is at your own risk. Now that my boats are winterized, protected from freezing, oil's changed, gear lube's changed, and I'm starting to get things tucked away in the garage here, there is other maintenance that's in the book that you really should do. Over time, I've gathered a forest, I'll call it, of grease guns. Mercury recommends a different grease for just about everything, and I follow their recommendations. And I'll just say that the engineers for Mercruiser and Mercury, they know what their greases are capable of, and they know the application, and a lot of times these applications are pretty tough. And I'll tell you, as an engineer in the automotive world, early in my career I worked on grease quite a bit. We were working on grease and doing testing to see what grease would last the longest in certain suspension applications and brake calipers and so forth. And I got an appreciation that the different formulations are important. So anyway, their standard is one that they call 2,4-C with Teflon or with PTFE. And I keep that one around because you use this for a lot. This is kind of the best general lubricant for prop shafts and the outdrive pivots and so forth. So that's a good one for that. Now, I understand this one is discontinued. There are two of them here that I use that are discontinued, and they now have one they call Extreme that's supposed to replace both of these. This one is spline and coupler, and you use it for the engine coupler and the main drive shaft spline. But it's different from 2,4-C for the prop shaft spline, probably because the corrosion level is different, and this is designed for the vibration that you get from a firing engine up in the engine compartment. This one is the U-joint grease, a U-joint and gimbal bearing, and this boat still has a greasable gimbal bearing. As time goes on, Mercruiser folks have made improvements, and some of these I don't have to use on the new boat. The boat behind me here is a 1998. My new one is a 2018, and over the 20 years they've reduced some of the service needs, but this one I'll need to do some greasing. Then I've got one for these trailer hubs. Years and years ago I settled on this is a Lubramatic product, marine corrosion control trailer wheel bearing grease. One of the things with grease is you don't want to mix different greases that don't have the same base. So you have to watch whether it's a lithium-based grease or see, this one is calcium sulfonate complex, which won't go very well with some of the lithium greases. So this is the one I use. I keep a box of these tubes on hand, and this is all I use in both trailers. And I keep one grease gun filled with it. This Easy Loader in this particular design has grease fittings on the hubs, and on the back side of the suspension, on the suspension arm, there's a port. So you feed grease in, it flows through, and it comes out. Basically, I just put a box underneath there when it's time to grease them to catch what comes out. And I'll tell you, you can do things your way, but what I've learned is I only take these bearings apart every 10 years or so, just to take a look and see. But with a grease gun and one of these tubes, I can put one tube of grease through 4 hubs and flow it all the way through and see if there's any water in it. If it's dry and I don't get any water out, I'm happy. Because this is a very high quality grease. So basically I count pumps and I end up putting about 1/4 of a tube in each one of the wheels. And then I have an infrared thermometer, one of those gun-shaped jobs you've seen me use on other jobs probably. And when I'm out on the road, when I come in for a stop, I'll come around and use that on the bearings and just do a spot check on the bearings and make sure that nothing's getting out of line. Several years ago I did that and found one of the bearings was really getting hot. Really getting hot. Maybe 300 degrees, 250-ish. And normally they'll run 100, 125 or so. I got around back and checked the brake drum, and the brake drum was running about 400. And the brake was dragging. And so, I had to come in and repair brakes. It's a good early warning thing, but if you can drive on these and the bearing temperatures aren't more than 125 or so, and you keep fresh grease in them, you should be good. My newer trailer, with the newer chaparral, has a different design, and you put, same thing, it has fittings, but you put grease in the front and it circulates through and comes back out to you. And once again, I put, sometimes those will get just a touch of water in them. I'll get a little bit of milkiness in the grease. And again, I use this, pump it through until I have clear flow. And again, as long as the hubs stay cool and as long as I keep fresh grease in them, I'm happy. So that deals with grease. Now I've got my service manual, and I'm just going to mention a few things that, again, scheduled maintenance that you should be taking a look at. Okay. Power steering fluid level. Battery, it's wintertime, make sure your battery gets unhooked and you keep it charged. Power trim, make sure the level's good. Anodes, make sure they're not, check them for erosion. Drive belts, make sure the condition looks good and the tension is right. Now, I got to pull the propeller off and lubricate the shaft. Clean and paint exterior surfaces. We've already flushed and winterized. Seawater pickup pump says disassemble and inspect whenever seawater insufficient flow is suspected and operating temperature or operating temperature exceeds the normal range. Flame arrestor, you need to pull the flame arrestor off the engine and make sure it's clean, or if not, clean it. And typically I use like spray carburetor or fuel injector cleaner on it, and then you set it outside and let it dry off before you put it back on the engine. But a dirty flame arrestor is a dangerous thing, because if you get a backfire, you catch your flame arrestor on fire, and that's not a good thing either. So it's a safety thing. PCV valve, well, that's on the engine side, but if you have one, you should check it. Gimbal ring, there's a clamp, they want you to retorque screws or check the torque. Rear engine mounts, they want you to check the torque. Lubricate the gimbal bearing, again if you can. Some of the newer ones are sealed. Steering, there's some lubrication on the steering and the shift system points. Check your hoses. Check the continuity wires. There's a continuity circuit with little jumper wires on the inside here, and they should all still be good. Lubricate shift and throttle. Linkages. Engine exhaust. Just inspect visually to make sure that, check for tightness, it says. So you can put a screwdriver on the clamps or make sure they're not loose. Ignition timing, I'm not a reason to mess with that one because it's fixed, but steering, you want to inspect and lubricate. Universal engine alignment. I'll come back to that one in a second. Universal joint splines and cross shaft bearings. And they tell you that every 300 hours of operation, or salt water every year, fresh water every 2 years. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't do that frequently. You know, they say universal cross bearings inspect and lubricate the splines. Well, now on this boat, in the past, I had a boat from the mid-80s. You had to pull the drive every year, lubricate the U-joints, and lubricate the spline, and put the drive back in. Now again, to Mercury continuing to make improvements, now you have, this boat has Permalube U-joints. They're sealed and they have a grease that's supposed to be lifetime. So why would, even though the book says I should take it apart and take the U-joints apart and inspect them, in my kind of usage, if it's not noisy, if it's not misbehaving, if I don't have any reason to suspect the U-joints are in trouble, I can't recommend differently than the book says. I'll just tell you that I don't take it all apart as often. Same thing with the coupler. As I said, you used to have to pull it out and grease the splines. Well, now there's a spot inside the coupler has grease fittings on it, and you can pump grease in with one of these grease guns. And you don't have to have as many grease guns as I have, but it's a whole lot more convenient to have 2 grease guns instead of taping one and keep switching cartridges in it. So what have I got down here? You know, 1, 2, 3, 4 grease guns. It was a whole lot easier to just have 4 of them than to, like I say, to keep switching. They want you to inspect the bellows and the clamps so we can look underneath and make sure the bellows are in good shape. And then there's an engine alignment check. And I bought this tool years ago after my first boat because they make a big deal about check engine alignment every 2 years. And I keep it in the anti-corrosion paper. This is an alignment bar, official Mercury Mercruiser alignment bar. And it's got different ends and it's got a couple of different adapters, whether you're running an alpha drive or whether you're running a remote drive or different transmission. So it's a kind of a universal tool. It's got different steps on it. But the idea is that you're supposed to slide it into the gimbal bearing and into the engine coupler. And if it slides in smoothly, you can get it in and out smoothly. The engine is in line. If the engine mounts have shifted and it goes up and down, you could bind up and damage either the gimbal bearing or the spline in the coupler. It would be expensive. And when I had a boat there, I had to pull the drive every other year to grease the U-joints. I bought this and I used it. Although I'll just say from a practical standpoint is, if the system is in line, when you pull the drive and you install the drive and it slides real nice, I mean, this is like the spline and this is like the gimbal bearing. If it goes together nice and easy, it seems to me like, you know, maybe I don't really need the bar. On the other hand is, if it gets out of line, you really do need this to adjust the engine mounts and get things back into line so that your drive will go back in. You really don't want to be muscling around that drive trying to slide it in and out and make adjustments. So, but what they want you to do is pull the stern drive, plug this in and make sure it goes in smoothly. That's when they say check alignment, this is the tool. And these are things, according to the book, that your dealer should do. But you can buy the bar, you can buy the tool. And I'll tell you, on my first boat, I did have mounts that got loose. They didn't get out of alignment, but they did get a little bit loose, and I did have to go back and torque them, and I did have to check them. So, alignment bar. All right, I need to take the propeller off and grease the shaft. And you got to pull these tabs. This is an older one. My new boat has a different style, but with this one you can bend the tabs up. And a couple ways you can do it with a screwdriver. Or this little hook tool works pretty nice. But I've got 3 tabs bent down. So I'll pull up those 3 tabs, like so. And then got an 1 1/16 socket, or I think a 27 millimeter will fit it too if you're working in metric. And then let's see if we can, there we go, hold it with a block of wood. Slide that guy off and just kind of do a check. Looks okay. I don't see anything in the prop shaft seal. Actually, looks like the grease is in pretty good shape. I don't usually grease this as often as I should, but that's because it doesn't sit in the water most of the time. It's usually either on a trailer or on a hoist. Alright, so we're going to just smear. If you don't do this one, the prop can seize to the shaft. You don't want that, so we lube that one first. It's not quite dropped in yet. There we go. Want that piece to follow the contour of the nut. All right, so it's down. Then the official spec is 55 foot-pounds on the nut. And until you get tabs to line up. So, okay, that's 55, and I got tabs lined up. We'll push those down in. And that should be good for a while. On this one we need to do the pivots here on the drive gimbal ring. It doesn't really need a lot. You can see the grease coming out over here, but you just pump a little bit in. It gets a fresh load. Wipe off the excess. Clean this one off. Same thing. My grease gun's not cooperating real well today. I'm only getting a partial stroke, but it's coming through in the back here. So I have a nice dose of that. I think my tube of grease is getting low, but it looks like I got those filled. They don't need a lot. You just need to get enough fresh grease in there to make sure that the pivots are lubricated. Alright, then we got this one here for the gimbal bearing. I'm going to pull the cap off. And use the gimbal bearing grease on this one. This transducer is new for me this year, and it's kind of in the way, but I turned my nozzle just put a few pumps in there. That should be good. And if that didn't work, on some of my grease guns I've had to put a flexible hose to get into some of the fittings, so if I ran into more trouble, that's what I would do. Now, one of the things you're supposed to look at is the anodes. That's what these are, the zincs that are sacrificial. Now mine have a little, they're corroding some, which is what you want them to do. But there's one on each side back here. There's one here on the front of the anti-cavitation ventilation plate. There's a big one down here underneath, right there, that, I say they're corroded some, but they're all still in place. If they were not, I would want to replace those. That one's still got plenty of it there though. But they protect the aluminum in your outdrive from deteriorating, from corroding. They're sacrificial, so we got that. You want to keep an eye out for these are the grounding circuits. So you got a grounding wire that connects here at both ends. There's one down here by the lift cylinder, and actually there's another one on the opposite side, and there are some more inside the boat. But these again help your system keep it from corroding by grounding all the parts together. So you kind of want those to be done. Up underneath is you have a bellows. Well, you have two bellows, or three, depends on your point of view. But you can see right there, the one on the bottom once upon a time that was an exhaust bellows. It was replaced with what's called an exhaust tube that matches up to the stern drive when it's down. It still uses through prop exhaust. Above it is the U-joint bellows. And you want to take a look and make sure that it isn't cracking and deteriorating. If that one breaks, if the exhaust bellows breaks, it just gets noisy. Or noisier. If the U-joint bellows breaks, you'll get water in the boat and you can sink. So you want to keep an eye on that one. Be on the right-hand side for the shift system and the shift cable. I can't get the camera up in there very well, but it's that little bellows. And so you want to inspect all those and make sure they're good. And there's one last thing on the outside before I move to the inside, and that is these fasteners need to be torqued to 55. And you want to make sure they aren't coming loose. And sometimes they do relax just a little bit. That's good. And on these gimbal ring clamping screws, if you can't get enough torque on them, if they're not tight, one of the things is there's a nut on the back side, and if you turn the drive to one side, you can get a wrench on them. Mine's a 9/16. Get an end wrench on it so that you can hold it when you torque the other side. It was moving on me. There we go, 55. I was only getting about 45 and it was starting to slip. The other one was good at 55. If you turn the drive, you also get a little better window in at the bellows. So that's the universal joint bellows. And mine looks like it's in pretty good shape. I don't see any. There are some markings where the convolutions rub up against each other. But otherwise it looks pretty good. For a boat that's as old as it is, not bad. Alright, on the inside here, I need to lubricate just a little bit of oil, just a few drops. And my guns usually, my oil cans usually loaded up with just 30 weight straight weight engine oil, which works just fine on this. Come on. There we go. I don't want too much, but I'll get a couple back here. Just a little bit. I don't want to make a mess on the engine, so it's just a drop. Just a drop. And then one down below here. Just a little bit, just a little bit. Okay. That's the shift linkage. And then there's the steering. Now, some steering cables have a grease fitting. The service manual shows that it may. I think Mercury's cables have it. This one does not. It's apparently sealed. The book says that if you have one with a grease fitting, you need to make sure that it's turned so that it's all the way contracted, or the cable's all the way in before you put any grease on it. But I don't have to really worry about that. What I do have to worry about is we want to put a little bit of 30 weight oil on those steering connections. Not on the cylinder itself, but on the pivots. And this is the fun part because it's a really tight squeeze in there, but there's one here. There's one here. And it's fun to get around to. A little bit down here. It's a power steering. It's a power steering one, so the steering itself is okay. You don't need to lubricate the rod. Just the pivots. That all looks pretty good. And then once again there's one of these wires up here. It's part of that grounding loop. You just kind of always want to keep an eye on those and make sure there aren't any that have broken or hanging out in the breeze, I'll call it. There is a recommendation to make sure that these are all tight, that your exhaust cables and clamps and so forth. I'll put a screwdriver on them in a little bit. Hard to do multiple hand work with the camera, but they look like they're in good shape. The The clamps aren't loose. So that is probably fine. We'll go look at the other side. Same thing over here. Just gotta make sure they're all tight. And it's been quite a few years, but I have this side apart because I was running it too hard, too fast on the garden hose, and there's a set of shutters in here that that have rubber in them, and I overheated them and they came spitting out the exhaust. So you have engine mount bolts down here. They're kind of hard to reach. They're supposed to be torqued to 40, so it always helps to get a wrench on them, and sometimes I can't get a torque wrench to them, but make sure those guys are tight on both sides. Now, this next one, I'm trying to show you the engine coupler, and it has a grease zerk on it, and that grease zerk can be reached so that you don't have to pull the drive to lube the spline. And so, to give you an example, so here's the whole engine. I'm going to go down the starboard side here, and we're going to go in under the exhaust. And so now I'm looking through the spark plug wires, and in the center of the picture, right there, is the grease zerk. If it'll focus on it, come on. Right there is the grease zerk. And it's on the engine coupler. The spline is inside there. You probably can't tell because of where I'm holding the camera, but it's pointed horizontally toward the starboard side of the boat. What you can do is you can either bump the engine with the starter motor, which this boat I can do. On the new boat, I don't think I can bump it with the starter motor because it has an ECM controlled crank and it'll just want to keep cranking. So bumping with the starter motor's not such a great idea anymore. But you can put a wrench with the power off, battery disconnected. You could put a wrench on the crankshaft, and it'll have compression, so you got to go very, very slowly to let the compression release. But you could rotate that, and what I do is I rotate it until that grease fitting is pointed vertical. It's hard to do it by sight. Sometimes you can get in there with one of these mirrors on a stick and get a look at it. But typically what I do is I have my spline grease here in one of these grease guns with a solid tip on it. And if you go in where that drop light is, when you get that pointed upright, you go down the back with the grease gun vertically, and you kind of go around by feel until you feel the grease zerk. And then, when you know the feeling of what a grease gun feels like when you pop it on the zerk, then you give it several pumps and grease it. And all of that is a lot of challenge, so I'm not going to do that on camera. I'm going to do that later, but I do that pretty regularly. I have tried from the port side, and sometimes if you crawl in that compartment, sometimes you can reach it from the side over there. But I've kind of had better success working down over the top here. There's a hose in the way, but once you get back behind that hose, and you get, I don't know if I can get the camera in there any closer, but we'll try. it's, you know, it's down underneath there, and it's just very hard to, it's kind of a forest of stuff down there, but that's the output of the engine, and the coupler is right in there. And some of the couplers have two grease fittings on them, and some have a single grease fitting on them. But that's what that takes. So, as I said, I'm going to do that separately. I decided to show you where I ended up. For those of you who say that's impossible, there's just no way to do it. Right now, you see that blue grease gun, it's on the fitting. I crank the engine very, very, very slowly with a ratchet wrench and a 5/8 socket, which is what works on this 305, 5 liter. Basically to put the Zerk fitting to the top, so I cranked it until it was to the port side as the boat goes, or to the right hand as we're looking at it, just a little over center, and put the grease gun in there. And you can see that I also ran the handle, the pump handle, on one side of the throttle cable, and the tube is on the opposite side of the throttle cable. And just so you can see where we ended up, so there's the grease tube, and it goes down to the coupler. It's snapped onto the Zerk fitting right there in the middle. This is coming from the port side of the boat. And I was able to look through underneath the exhaust and get on it and grease it. And I've got several pumps of grease in it. You just want to make sure that you prime your gun and make sure that it's ready, because it's hard to get a good swing in there. But that's how you get grease to the coupler. At least that's how I do it. I should also mention that in order to get that in there, I turned the steering hard over to port, which brings the steering linkage over to the left in your view and gets it out of the way so I could get the grease gun down there. With the steering straight or to the opposite side, the steering lever is in the way and you can't get on it. So this is the flame arrestor, and it arrests flame because of all these thin plates. The concept of a flame arrestor is that a flame cannot pass through a mesh like this, because the mesh will cool it off and quench it. And so this is like a backfire suppressor. This is a safety device. You know, it's certified SAE. It's hard to really get a look through it, but you can put light through it. But this one's in pretty good condition. I cleaned it a year or so ago. It's only got about 20 or 30 hours on it. But with all these plates, it takes some kind of solvent to get in there and clean the stuff out and make sure you don't have dust and grime and stuff hanging around on the outside, and then making sure that it's thoroughly dry before you come back in and reinstall it on the engine. I did go down and torque mounts and did find that that big 1 1/8" nut was not as tight as it should have been. It was a little bit to the light. It was tight, but not tight enough. Also need to check the power steering fluid, and it has both a hot and a cold mark on it, and it looks like it's full cold. Get a fresh dip on it here. It's up at full cold, so that's good. We just changed the outdrive fluid, and it's in good shape. It's above the add mark. I may need to add just a little bit more now that it's settled in, but it's good. And in the back is the trim pump, and I can see from here that the level of fluid in the trim system is up where it belongs. So I think I've run the gamut, and that's all that I need. And the last one will be when I'm totally finished, is I will disconnect the ground on the battery, and I'll come back and put a charger on this battery about once a month over the course of the winter, and everything should be ready for spring, for next spring. That's all for now.